They say the dead don't knock, but that night, someone did. The knock came just as the wind began to scream. It wasn't a polite tap. It was desperate, urgent, like someone trying to hold on to life with their last ounce of strength. Clara. Whitmore froze where she stood in the kitchen, fingers clenched tight around the handle of her old iron kettle. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she'd imagined it. Out here, miles from the nearest neighbor, the mind could play cruel tricks, especially on lonely hearts, but then it came again. Fist pounding on the front door. 1, 2, 3 times. She moved slowly, her boots heavy on the wooden floorboards, the shotgun already in her hands out of instinct. Outside, the storm raged like a thing alive, rain pelting the windows, wind howling through the cracks in the shutters. It had rolled in fast from the mountains, thick with lightning and the scent of coming danger. Clara edged toward the door. Her heart thudded so loud it nearly drowned out the storm. She'd lived alone ever since Hank died. Men didn't visit out. Here without reason, and reason usually meant trouble. With a deep breath, she flung the door open. Lightning flashed. A man stood on her porch, soaked to the bone, blood dripping from his shoulder, eyes half closed with pain. And then, he fell. She didn't scream. Clara wasn't the screaming type. She'd buried a husband, birthed cattle in blizzards, and once shot a coyote right between the eyes when it came for her chickens. But the sight of this stranger stirred. Something in her. Fear, yes, but also something older. A memory, maybe, or a warning. She dragged his heavy body inside, grunting with effort. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and unconscious, but still clutching a revolver like it was part of him. His skin was pale, slick with rain and blood. As she laid him by the fire, her eyes fell on something tucked into his torn shirt pocket. Badge blackened, bent, burnt at the edges. Clara narrowed her eyes. She'd seen plenty of U.S. Marshal badges in her youth, back when Hank served under Judge Franklin, but this one wasn't polished silver. This one looked like it had been pulled from a fire, or a grave, and worse, the initials carved into the back weren't his. She hesitated for a long moment before lighting a lantern and grabbing her old sewing kit. The bullet wound needed tending and fast. She worked in silence, cleaning the gash, stitching it closed with trembling hands, but her mind raced. Who was he? Why was he wearing a badge that didn't belong to him? And if he was running from something, would it come for him here? As thunder shook the walls and shadows danced on the ceiling, Clara stared down at the sleeping stranger beside her fire. She'd just let a ghost into her home. A ghost with a gun, and a secret burning darker than the storm outside. The storm didn't let up that night. If anything, it got worse. Thunder cracked like gunshots over the hills, and the wind screamed through the gaps in Clara's window panes. Inside, the ranch house flickered with firelight and fear. The stranger lay still on the rug beside the hearth, his shirt bloodied, chest rising slow but steady. Clara sat beside him with a damp cloth, wiping the sweat from his brow. Every so often he'd twitch or groan, lost in whatever nightmare was clawing through his fever. She wanted to ask him questions, but the man was far from ready to speak. Instead, her eyes kept returning to that badge. She hadn't put it back in his pocket. It lay on the table near the oil lamp, and every time the light caught it, it shimmered dark like a coal pulled from hell. She couldn't shake the feeling that it had seen fire and blood. Clara stood and crossed the room to her bookshelf. She pulled out a thin leather ledger, Hank's old law records. He'd kept names of marshals he served with, notes on trials, details of the men who rode circuits through this part of Wyoming. She flipped through it until her fingers stopped on 3 letters. JPR. Those were the same initials scratched into the back of the badge. James Porter Rourke. Dead 5 years. Hung in Cheyenne for shooting a saloon owner and his son over a crooked poker game. So how the hell did his badge end up on the chest of the man bleeding in her home? Her stomach churned. She stared down at the stranger again. He looked peaceful now. His dark hair lay matted against his forehead. The scar on his cheek, deep and clean, told a story of its own. He wasn't old, maybe 30, 32, but he'd seen things. Things most men didn't survive. Suddenly, he stirred. His hand twitched, then clenched around empty air. His eyes fluttered open, piercing, alert, and then confused. "You ain't law," he rasped, his voice low like gravel under wagon wheels. Clara froze. "Neither are you." The man tried to sit, winced, and fell back. He looked around the room like a cornered animal, then reached for his side. But his gun was gone. Clara had placed it on the mantel, out of reach. "Who are you?" she asked, tightening her grip on the cloth in her hands. He didn't answer, just stared at her, like he was trying to figure out if she was friend or threat. Clara stepped back, her heart racing. "That badge, it belonged to James Rourke. He's dead." The man blinked, then gave a bitter smile. "Yeah, I know. I watched him die." He didn't explain further. His head hit the pillow again and his breathing slowed. Sleep dragged him under once more. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in her rocking chair with her shotgun resting across her lap, eyes on the man who'd stumbled into her life like a ghost rising out of the grave. By morning, the storm had passed, but something darker had settled over her ranch, something that wouldn't leave with the rain. The morning sun rose slow and red, like it too had bled through the night. Clara stood on her porch, arms folded, eyes scanning the wide stretch of land that rolled out from her ranch. The storm had turned the dirt into thick mud, and puddles reflected the sky like shattered glass. Inside, the stranger still slept, fevered, breathing shallow, caught between pain and secrets. She'd tried again to wake him near dawn, but he only mumbled fragments. "Railroad. Prescott. He knew. Not my fault." Nothing made sense. Clara was used to silence. She'd lived in it since Hank passed, and sometimes she wore it like armor. But today, the silence felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. That's when she heard it. Distant hoofbeats. Faint, but clear. Steady. Not wild. Not fast. Riders approaching. With purpose. Her blood went cold. She moved quick. Pulled the stranger's revolver from the mantel and slipped it into the drawer. Then she tucked the blackened badge into a jar of flour. Nobody would think to look there. She didn't know why she was hiding these things for him, only that her gut told her to do it. Then she walked out to the gate. A single rider came over the rise. Dusty hat, long duster coat, the kind of man who didn't smile unless it was bad news. His horse was lean and mean, and the man rode like he'd done it all his life. Lawman, bounty hunter, or worse. He stopped 10 yards from her fence and tipped his hat. "Ma'am," Clara nodded slowly. "Morning? I'm looking for a man, 6 foot, dark hair. Might be wounded, might be dangerous." The man's voice was flat, emotionless. "Goes by Everett Kane. You seen anyone like that?" The name meant nothing to her. Everett Kane. But the face in her living room, it matched the description too well. She shook her head. "Ain't seen anyone 'cept cows and clouds the past week." He narrowed his eyes like he was trying to peel her open with a stare. "He's wanted. Escaped custody 2 days back. Took down a federal marshal with him." Clara's breath caught. "Dead?" "Shot in the gut. Died slow, they say." The silence between them stretched long. The man leaned slightly in his saddle. "If you hear anything, or anyone shows up hungry, hurt, or talking strange, you let Marshall Greeley know." He tossed something through the air. Clara caught it, a silver coin stamped with the seal of the territory marshal's office. Then he turned and rode off without another word. Clara waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then she looked down at the coin. Marshall. So the stranger had killed one, or had he saved himself from one? She turned slowly and walked back into the house. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. The man still slept, but his fingers now twitched against the blanket, like he was dreaming of gunfire. And Clara was starting to wonder if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, but something inside her whispered, "No, you didn't. Make a mistake. You opened a door that was meant to be opened, even if it led to hell." By late afternoon, the fever began to break. Clara had changed the man's bandages twice, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and forced a few sips of water past his lips. The storm had left the house damp and quiet, but the tension inside was louder than ever. He stirred again, this time with more awareness. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the soft light. Clara was at the table, sewing a tear in her apron, when she noticed. "You're awake." He groaned, tried to sit up, and failed. Where am I?" "My ranch," Clara said calmly. "You collapsed on my porch with a hole in your shoulder, a scorched badge, and a gun that wasn't loaded." He blinked, processing. "You patched me up?" She nodded. "Name?" He hesitated. "Everett." "Last name?" Another pause. "Kane." So the marshal hadn't lied. She stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's coffee on the stove. You look like you could use something real." "Thanks," he muttered, his voice gravelly and dry. Clara didn't ask more questions right away. She brought him a mug and helped him sit up just enough to drink. He took slow sips, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't ask a lot," he said after a minute. "I will when I'm ready." A shadow passed over his face. "You're not scared of me?" "Should I be?" He didn't answer, just stared into the flames like he saw something far away. Later that evening, while Everett dozed again, Clara went to fetch the family Bible from the mantel. It had belonged to her grandmother, and she often used it to press herbs or dried flowers between the pages. She opened it, flipping through gently, and there it was, tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, a photograph. Black and white, faded. Two men standing outside a dusty jailhouse, arms crossed, both in long coats with badges on their chests. One she recognized immediately, Hank, her late husband. The other, her heart skipped. It was the same man who now lay wounded in her house. Younger, cleaner shaven, but unmistakably him. Her fingers trembled as she held the photo closer. There was handwriting on the back, Hank and Everett, Fort Johnson, 1867. Partners in justice. Clara stared at it for a long time, mind spinning. Everett hadn't mentioned Hank, hadn't said a word about knowing her. Was he hiding it on purpose? And why did the law say he killed a marshal if he once was one? Her eyes flicked to the jar of flour where the badge was hidden. Something was deeply wrong here. A man running from justice, a burnt badge, a photograph linking him to her dead husband. She suddenly realized Everett might not be the only one keeping secrets. Maybe Hank had too. Clara sat alone by the fire long after the lamps had been turned down. The photograph lay in her lap, its edges worn and curling like it had waited years to be found. She traced Hank's face with her thumb, the jaw she once kissed goodnight, the eyes that used to watch the planes from the porch every evening. And beside him, Everett Kane. She couldn't reconcile the man lying in her spare cot with the man in the photo. Back then, he had stood tall, proud. His badge gleamed under the summer sun. And Hank, her Hank, had smiled in that way he only ever did when he truly respected someone, but Hank had never spoken of him, never once, not over coffee. Not by the fire. Not even during those long, hard winters when memories rose easier than steam. She closed her eyes, letting the fire's warmth pull her into the past, into a memory she hadn't touched in years. It was the fall of '67. She remembered Hank riding in late one evening, dust on his coat, eyes darker than usual. He'd been gone a week, said he was helping transport a prisoner from Fort Johnson to Denver. When she asked how it went, he just kissed her forehead and muttered, "Some men you save, some men you leave behind." She thought nothing of it at the time. But now, she wondered, was Everett that prisoner? or the man trying to stop him. A crack from the fireplace snapped her back to the present. She looked toward the cot. Everett stirred slightly, mumbling in his sleep again. This time louder. No, Hank, that ain't what we agreed. You said you'd cover me. Clara sat bolt upright. You said she'd never know. Her blood turned cold. She rose slowly, crossing the room without a sound, standing over him. His face was twisted in whatever dream gripped him, a storm of regret, betrayal, and fear. You said they'd bury the truth. Clara's mind spun. She clutched the photo tighter, knuckles white. What truth? What had Hank buried? And why was Everett here now, not just bleeding and hunted, but carrying a ghost that belonged to both of them? She returned to her chair, heart pounding. Outside, the wind howled low through the hills like it too remembered. If Everett Kane had come here to die, he'd picked the right place. But Clara wasn't about to let anyone die in her home without knowing exactly what sin they carried in their chest. She would get answers, even if they tore her heart in two. The next morning dawned quiet and sharp, the kind of day where the sky looks too blue to be trusted. Clara didn't wait. She brought Everett black coffee and laid the photograph in his lap like a pistol. Tell me the truth, she said, voice low. All of it. Why was your picture in my Bible next to Hank's? Why did you whisper his name in your sleep like it was a curse? Everett didn't flinch. His eyes dropped to the photo, and for a long moment, he said nothing. Just stared at the two young men frozen in time, partners, lawmen, maybe even friends. Finally, he exhaled. Your husband saved my life once, and I paid him back by ruining his. Clara blinked, stunned. Everett's hand trembled slightly as he set the picture aside. We rode together for a year. Hank had the guts and the heart. Me? I had the instincts, the kind that get men locked up if they don't keep their mouth shut. There was a job back in '67. We were chasing a gang tied to the Prescott line. Big railroad men, rich devils who paid to keep their hands clean. Clara leaned in. What kind of job? A marshal named Rourke was with us. Brutal man. Thought justice came out the barrel of a gun, not a courtroom. We cornered the gang in a canyon near Blackwater. Rourke shot first, killed two before they even raised their hands. Everett's eyes went distant. I tried to stop him. Hank backed me up. But the official story said Rourke died in the crossfire. That we were heroes. Clara's voice dropped. But that's not what happened, is it? Everett looked at her then, and something in his eyes cracked. Rourke pulled his gun on me when I told him I'd testify against him. Hank stepped between us. Rourke fired, Hank shot back. Rourke went down. He paused. And I ran. I couldn't take the stand. If I had, they'd have buried Hank with Rourke. Clara's throat tightened. So you left him to clean up your mess. He nodded, shame thick on his face. He told me to disappear. Said he'd handle it. That you'd never need to know. And I never saw him again. Silence stretched between them like a canyon. Clara's hands curled into fists. You made him a liar. Everett's eyes welled, but he didn't defend himself. He made me promise to stay away from you. But when I got shot 2 days ago, I thought maybe I was meant to die on the land of the only man who ever called. Me, brother? Clara turned away, torn between rage and heartbreak. She had lived years thinking Hank was a straight shooter, honest to a fault. And now, this fugitive had dropped into her life like a match in dry grass. But something in her gut whispered. Everett hadn't told the whole truth yet. There was more, something darker, and she'd drag it out of him, before the law did. Bye. Mid-morning, Clara had made up her mind. She walked into the room with her jaw set, spine straight, and no softness left in her eyes. Everett sat at the table now, pale but steady, sipping weak coffee with one arm in a sling. She didn't waste time. You've got one more night. Then I ride into town and tell Marshal Greeley you're here. Everett didn't argue. He just looked at her like a man too tired to lie. Then I'd better start praying. No, Clara said coldly. You'd better start talking. But before he could respond, something outside caught her eye. Movement by the tree line. She stepped toward the window, hand inching toward the old rifle by the door. A rider. Tall. Slouched in the saddle like he didn't care if he was seen. He wore a black hat, too wide to be decent, and a coat stained with road dust and dried blood. He wasn't Marshall Greeley. She felt it in her gut. Everett, she whispered. You expecting company? He stood slowly, peering out the window, his face drained of what little color he had left. God help us, he muttered. That's Silas Red. Clara had heard the name before, once, years ago, whispered by Hank on a night when the wind carried old fears. Silas Red, gang leader, killer, a man who didn't leave witnesses, just warnings. What does he want? She asked. Everett's lips were dry. Me? Or what he thinks I still have? Clara's voice turned to steel. And what's that? Everett looked at her, hesitating. But it was too late. Outside, the rider dismounted, moved slow, like he had all the time in the world, tied his horse to the post, then reached under his coat and pulled something heavy, a shotgun. Clara turned, grabbed the rifle, and loaded a round with shaking hands. If he comes to that door, I shoot first. Everett didn't stop her. He limped toward the back room, pulled a small pouch from his coat, thick, leather, and oddly shaped. He shoved it into the floorboards under the stove just before footsteps creaked up the porch. Clara raised the rifle, held her breath. 3 knocks, then a voice, low and poisonous. Miss Clara. She froze. He knew her name. Word in town is you're nursing a dying dog. Thought I'd come see if he needs burying. Everett's hand brushed her arm. Don't open that door, he won't talk twice. Clara didn't move. Neither did Silas. Then, after a long pause, his voice dropped even lower. I ain't here to fight. I'm here for what was stolen from me years ago. I just want it back. And Clara realized something chilling. Silas wasn't here just for Everett. He was here for whatever Hank and Everett had hidden long ago, and that pouch under her stove might be what started it all. As Silas Red's boots thudded down the porch steps and faded into the dirt, Clara bolted the door and turned toward Everett, breath shallow. He'll be back, she said. Probably tonight, with more men. Everett nodded. And he won't. Knock next time. Clara looked toward the stove. The leather pouch still sat under the floorboard, like it pulsed with its own dangerous heartbeat. What is he really after, Everett? For a moment, Everett looked like he might lie again, but then he sighed, stepped forward, and knelt beside her. His hand reached into the dark crawl space, pulling the pouch into the firelight. The leather was cracked and scorched in places, stitched, unevenly like someone had sewn it shut in a hurry. He opened it. Inside were 2 things. 1. A stack of folded yellowing documents. 2. A single gold coin, not American, but marked with the crest of the Prescott Line, a private railroad syndicate that had once built half the West and bribed the rest into silence. Clara's brow furrowed. She unfolded the first paper and read aloud. Rail Manifest number 27. Cargo manifest falsified at Fort Johnson. 12 crates marked machinery contained rifles and opium. Delivery ordered by S. Red under private contract. Marshal Everett Kane witnessed and filed objection, denied by Commandant Rourke. She looked up, stunned. This is evidence. Everett nodded grimly. The kind that would have hanged half the Prescott board. Silas was their enforcer. Rourke was their shield, and when I tried to expose them, they hunted you, she finished. He nodded. Clara unfolded the next paper, a personal letter from Hank. Everett, hide this where only the fire and the Lord can find it. If they catch you, don't speak. If I fall, don't look back. Clara must never know. But if you survive, and justice ever gets a second chance, bring it home. Her throat clenched. He trusted you with this. Everett's voice broke. And I failed him. Clara wiped her eyes, then stood and reloaded the rifle with shaking hands. No, she said. You kept it safe. That counts for something. They stared at each other in silence, old ghosts standing between them, the flicker of firelight, casting long shadows on the truth. Outside, a hawk screeched over the plains. Inside, Clara tucked the documents back into the pouch. If we give this to the law, Prescott will bury it. You said it yourself. They own the courtrooms. Everett nodded. Then what do we do? Clara looked him dead in the eyes. We survive the night. Then we take this straight to the press in Lincoln. I know a man who still believes in truth. Everett's lips curled into the faintest smile. Then we'd better survive. But as they began boarding the windows, Everett suddenly stopped. Clara? If Silas finds out what's in that pouch, he'll burn this ranch to the ground. He's done it before. She turned, eyes blazing. Then we make damn sure he never walks off my land. Night fell like a closing trap. Clara stood by the window with her rifle loaded, her eyes sweeping the darkness. Everett crouched beside the back door, a Colt .45 shaking slightly in his injured hand. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. Then, a whistle, sharp and brief, floated through the night air. Clara froze. He's here, Everett whispered. From the trees, shadows emerged. Not one, not two, but 5 men on horseback moving like ghosts. Their torches flared as they dismounted and spread out. Silas stood at the center, his long black coat swaying in the wind like a funeral banner. Clara's heart pounded. He didn't bother knocking this time. He just shouted, voice oily with confidence. You got 10 seconds to bring out what's mine, Miss Clara. After that, this place goes up like dry weed in July. Clara opened the window shutter a crack and shouted back, There's nothing here for you but bullets and regret. Silas chuckled. Then I'll take both. He lifted his hand, and the attack began. One of the men tossed a bottle lit with fire toward the barn. It hit the side, shattering in flame. The dry wood went up instantly. Clara screamed and fired a shot. The man crumpled behind the well. Everett limped to the front, firing from cover. Another outlaw ducked and returned fire, shattering the porch post beside Clara's face. Smoke filled the air. Horses whinnied and ran loose as the fire crackled higher. Inside, the heat rose. Everett's bandage bled again, but he held his ground. Then, the back door slammed open. A man in a red bandana rushed in with a hatchet. Clara didn't think. She swung the butt of her rifle and caught him clean across the face. He dropped, teeth clattering against the floor. Everett grabbed his shotgun and blasted through the window. Another attacker screamed and fell. But then, Silas himself stepped forward through the smoke, shotgun in hand, eyes wild. Give me the pouch, Clara, and I'll let him die clean. Clara emerged from the smoke, rifle steady, hair wild, breath like fire. You made one mistake, Silas. He narrowed his eyes. Yeah? What's that? She stepped closer. You came to my land, thinking I was alone. Behind Silas, a voice rang out, sharp, cold, and lawful. Drop it, Red. You're outgunned. It was Marshal Greeley. He stood on horseback with 6 deputies, rifles drawn, badges gleaming in the firelight. Behind them, a wagon, and Clara recognized the man driving it. Thomas Avery, the newspaper editor from Lincoln, her old friend. Silas turned, stunned. Before he could fire, Greeley's bullet ripped through his shoulder. He dropped his gun with a howl and fell to his knees. Within seconds, the rest of the outlaws were disarmed and on their faces in the dirt. Clara sank to her knees, hands trembling, staring as the barn smoldered and the wind finally calmed. Everett limped beside her. How? She smiled faintly. I sent a telegraph yesterday. Didn't trust you'd stay awake through the night. He laughed, then coughed. But Clara wasn't done yet. She looked at Greeley and held out the pouch. No law can keep this safe, she said. But the truth still can. The marshal nodded. We'll get it to Avery. Let the people see what was hidden in the dark. The sun rose slow and red over the scorched fields. Smoke still drifted from the blackened husk of Clara's barn. The ranch smelled of ash, gunpowder, and something more subtle, the kind of silence that comes after a battle and before a reckoning. Clara stood near the fence, arms crossed, eyes on the horizon. Marshal Greeley and his men had taken Silas and his gang into custody just before dawn. Thomas Avery had already left, the pouch of evidence locked in a case under his seat, wheels rolling fast toward Lincoln. 2 days, he'd said before leaving. Give me 2 days and I'll make the West remember who built it on lies. Clara believed him. She should have felt relief. But something still tugged at her. Something unfinished. Everett. She found him in the back field, trying to repair a busted water line despite the pain in his shoulder. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. You should be resting. He looked up, face pale but focused. I've done enough resting in other people's homes. She knelt beside him. You never told me the whole story. What you and Hank did. Everett swallowed hard. We were both young. Hank got pulled in first, bribed to run guns off the books, said it would feed the town, save the ranch, get us out of debt. I followed. Not because I wanted the money, but because I didn't want him facing those men alone. Clara's heart clenched. And the pouch? Hank hit it when he realized Prescott didn't want silence anymore. They wanted loyalty. The kind you die for. We tried to expose them, but the law was already bought. So we ran. Clara sat, back, dust coating her boots. You risked everything for the truth. But you still should have told me. He nodded. I was ashamed. She was quiet a moment, then said, The barn's gone, the herd scattered, but I'm still standing. Everett looked at her. And stronger than ever. A small, tired smile curved her lips. This place doesn't need saving. It needs rebuilding, and someone willing to bleed for it. He blinked. Are you asking me to stay? She didn't look at him, just stood, dusted off her hands and said, You built part of this once. If you want to finish the job, there's room. Then she walked away. Everett sat there stunned. For the first time in years, a door hadn't closed behind him. It had opened. Later that evening, as the wind picked up and the sky turned golden, Clara heard the town bell echo in the distance. Avery's paper had been published, and the front, Tage read, The West's Dirtiest Secret, Prescott Exposed. It carried Clara's name, Everett's, even Hank's. For the first time in decades, justice had a voice louder than money. But Clara knew this wasn't the end. This was only the halfway point, because once the truth is free, the real enemies come hunting. In Lincoln, chaos had erupted. Thomas Avery's article didn't just tell the truth, it screamed it. Prescott's secret contracts, falsified shipments, opium trade, arms smuggling, all laid bare with names, dates, and signed documents. And on the third page, a picture of Clara Whitmore, the widow who defied the West. By noon, Prescott's stock plummeted. By sundown, their private attorneys had fled the territory, and by midnight, they'd put a price on Clara's head. $10,000, dead or alive. Back on the ranch, Clara read the telegram in silence. Marshal Greeley had forwarded it with a note scrawled in haste. They won't send men in uniforms. They'll send monsters in dusters. Trust no one. I'm on my way, but keep a gun near your bed. Everett was pacing, a cold fury in his eyes. They're desperate and rich. That's a deadly combination. Clara folded the telegram and slipped it into her coat. We've faced worse. No, he said. We haven't. By morning, travelers began appearing near the outer fence. Pretending to be lost, asking for water, directions, anything to scope the land. One had a rifle under his saddle. Everett spotted it before the man could draw. They buried him quietly behind the orchard. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lit lanterns in all the windows, a false show of presence. and set tripwires along the north fence. Everett, his arm still stiff, kept watch from the hayloft, but what they didn't expect was who would come next. Near dawn, a rider appeared, alone. Hooded, Clara lifted her rifle. "Turn around or state your name." The rider dismounted slowly, raising both hands. "I ain't armed." Everett leaned over the loft edge. "You'll forgive us if we don't believe that." The rider pulled back his hood, and Clara's breath left her. It was Marshal James Rourke, the same man who'd buried the evidence all those years ago, the same man who'd told Hank to keep quiet, or disappear, older now, weathered. But those cold blue eyes hadn't aged a day. He smiled, like a wolf in church. "I ain't here to fight," he said. "I'm here to offer a deal." Everett dropped from the loft, fury rising. "You belong in a cell." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "You think those cells are built for men like me? You think truth can survive in the dark for long?" Clara stepped forward. "What do you want?" He held up a small brass envelope. "Prescott wants your silence. You take this money, 50,000, and you vanish. No more interviews, no more papers, no more playing sheriff." She stared at him, stunned. "You really came here thinking I'd sell out?" He tilted his head. "I came here knowing someone always does." He turned to Everett. "She's not the only one they're hunting, Kane. That price is on your head, too. But her face sells papers. Yours just sells dirt." Before Everett could react, Clara stepped between them. "You have 10 seconds to ride off this land, Marshal, or I'll bury you with the man behind the orchard." Rourke's smile faded. He looked at her for a long moment, then swung back onto his horse. "You'll regret this," he said. Clara didn't blink. "I already do." As his silhouette disappeared into the dust, Everett whispered, "You just made an enemy of the man who taught Silas Red how to kill." Clara's jaw clenched. "Then I'd better become the woman who teaches him how to die." The town of Lincoln had never looked smaller. Clara and Everett rode in just before dusk, eyes scanning the brick storefronts and shuttered windows. The streets were too quiet, too clean, like a wound that had just been stitched shut. The Lincoln Chronicle, once buzzing with printing presses and Avery's booming voice, now sat dark. Clara dismounted first, boots crunching over broken glass, near the doorway. The office door hung open, splintered down the middle, hinges bent like wire. Everett stepped inside first, revolver drawn. The room was a mess, papers scattered, ink spilled across the floorboards, and the printing press silent. But what chilled Clara most was the blood, just a few dark drops near the editor's desk. Not enough for death, but enough for fear. "Avery," she called out, but her voice echoed back hollow. Everett crouched beside the desk. "He fought back." Clara stared at the busted cabinet behind the press, the place Avery had once shown her as his backup archive. It was open, empty. All the originals, gone. She clenched her jaw. Prescott didn't just send bounty hunters, they sent cleaners. "Then he's alive," Everett said. "At least they needed him alive long enough to confirm what he had. They found footprints behind the building, several sets, boot marks deep and hurried. Wagon wheels, too, fresh." "They took him west," Everett muttered, pointing to the ruts. "Toward the old rail station." Clara's eyes narrowed. "We don't have much time." Just then, a figure appeared across the street. A boy, maybe 13, holding a folded piece of paper in one trembling hand. "You Clara Whitmore?" he asked. Clara approached slowly. "Who's asking?" He held out the note. "Mr. Avery gave me this yesterday. Said if he didn't come back by morning, I was to give it to the woman with fire in her eyes." She took it and unfolded the paper. The writing was hurried, ink smudged. "Clara, they found me. I tried to hide the rest, but they came too fast. There's one copy left. If I don't make it, go to the Red Hill Chapel, the old organ. You'll know what to do. Tell them the truth is still worth dying for. Avery. Her hands trembled slightly. Red Hill's 2 days out, Everett said. No wagons, no cover. If they're watching the roads, then we don't take the roads, Clara said. We take the ridge. Everett looked at her. That's suicide. Snakes, cougars, no water, and no bounty hunters. They mounted fast. As they rode toward the edge of town, Clara looked back once. The Lincoln Chronicle stood alone in the fading sun, a building wounded like its truth-teller. She whispered, more to herself than to Everett. They thought killing the paper would kill the story. Everett answered without turning. Then let's make sure the story bleeds louder than ever. The ridge was cruel. Sun-baked rocks stretched for miles, the wind sharp enough to draw blood. Rattlers hissed under brush, buzzards circled above, like they already knew how this story ended. Clara's horse stumbled once on a loose stone, but she urged it forward. The chapel was out there, hidden in the red dust like a buried confession. Behind them, Everett kept scanning the trail. We're not alone. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. They both felt it. By dusk, they reached the top of a jagged bluff. From there, Red Hill Valley opened like a scar, and at its center, the chapel stood, abandoned, broken. Its steeple half collapsed, vines wrapped around its whitewood like nature was trying to erase it. Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't seen this place in 17 years. Not since her mother died. Not since the funeral she never attended. Everett caught the look on her face. You okay? She nodded, but didn't speak. They tied the horses near an old stone well and approached the chapel slowly, boots crunching over shattered glass and dry leaves. Inside, it was darker than expected. Pews sat in disarray. A Bible lay open on the pulpit, pages yellowed and curling, but it was the organ that drew Clara's eyes. She stepped toward it. Old, dusty, still whole. She remembered it. Her mother used to play it during services. A quiet woman with strong fingers and sad eyes. Clara reached behind the panel, felt for the loose board, found it. Inside, a leather pouch, same kind as Hank had used. She opened it slowly. Documents, maps, names, and a letter. It read, To my daughter Clara. If you're reading this, the past has finally caught up. I stayed quiet for your sake. They paid me, threatened you. I let them bury your father, your uncle, and now me. But I hid the rest here. Because someday, I knew you'd come looking. Finish what they couldn't. Tell the truth. Burn the lies. Your mother, Miriam. Clara's hands trembled. All these years, she'd believed her mother was just weak. But she hadn't been. She'd been brave in silence. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed outside. A shot. Then another. Everett shoved Clara down behind a pew. We're found. Outside, a man's voice rang out, calm and cruel. You got further than most, Miss Whitmore. A figure stepped through the door, tall, lean, dressed in a long black duster, a black crow feather stitched into his lapel. His eyes were like coal, cold and unblinking. I'm here for the bounty, he said, lifting his repeater. But I'd be lying if I said this wasn't personal, too. Clara stood, rifle aimed. Who are you? He smiled. Name's Crow, the man who taught Silas Red how to track prey. And believe me, you smell a whole lot like cornered truth. Everett aimed beside her. Back out now, and we might leave you breathing. Crow just laughed. I didn't. Come alone. Footsteps echoed outside. At least 3 more men. Clara clutched the letter in one hand, the rifle in the other. Everett whispered, If we die here, we won't, she said, jaw set. Because my mother didn't die. In silence, just so I could. The walls of Red Hill Chapel had witnessed many prayers, but never a storm like this. Clara and Everett crouched behind the rotting pews, rifles at the ready, as Crow's cold eyes flicked between them. His men waited outside, their boots heavy. with the weight of the bounty on their heads. Crow smiled. Ain't no place for a lady to hide, Miss Whitmore, not when every man worth his salt is looking for your blood. Everett tightened his grip on his gun. Then you'll have to face the fire with us, Crow. The bounty hunter chuckled darkly. We all have our fires, Kane. The first shot came from the left. Clara fired back, the sound of gunpowder and violence filling the air. A man dropped to the ground, blood pooling beneath him. Crow's smile didn't waver. That's one down, but I reckon you'll be out of ammo soon. Everett glanced at Clara, his voice low. You have the pouch? Clara nodded, clutching the leather pouch close to her chest. Inside was the truth, the last remnants of a past that Prescott, the law, and even her mother had tried to bury. But Clara wasn't running anymore. Crow's men tried to circle around them, moving with the silence of vultures. Clara's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she reloaded, but her mind wasn't on the fight. It was on the letter in her pocket, her mother's handwriting, urging her to finish what had been started. The truth. The truth. She couldn't let it die here. Another shot rang out, but this time, it wasn't from Crow's men. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dying, light outside. It was Thomas Avery, dusty, covered in the blood of his own escape, but very much alive. I told you I'd make it back, he said, voice rough but steady. Clara blinked in shock. Avery, what are you? I couldn't let it end like this, he said, locking eyes with Crow. You thought you could kill Truth? You thought you could kill me? Crow's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. I didn't come to save you, Whitmore, Avery continued, his voice steady as he lowered his gun. I came to finish what I started. Clara could hardly believe her ears. What do you mean? Avery pulled out a bundle of papers from his coat. Everything Prescott tried to destroy is right here. Every lie, every deal, every person they buried. He turned to the altar, laying the bundle down on the wooden steps. This is the truth, and I'm not letting it rot anymore. Crow's gaze flicked to the bundle, and for the first time, doubt crossed his face. Avery stepped closer. You want the bounty, Crow? Take it, but the truth will haunt you until you rot. A silence filled the room, heavy and thick, before Crow took a step back, his hand twitching toward his belt. The moment stretched, and then gunfire. Not from Clara, not from Avery, but from outside. 3 men dropped in rapid succession, their bodies slumping lifelessly to the dust. The door opened again. The cavalry had arrived. The gunfire faded. Crow was gone, vanished, like smoke in the hills leaving behind his dead and a silence that tasted like ash. The cavalrymen holstered their rifles, but Clara knew better than to feel safe. Avery staggered forward, breath ragged. That bought us time, not peace. Everett helped him to a pew. We need to move. Prescott won't stop, not while this truth is breathing. Clara unrolled the bundle Avery had carried. The papers were brittle with age, but the ink hadn't. Faded. She saw ledgers, signed contracts, names she recognized, judges, sheriffs, even a preacher from her childhood church. This is what they killed Hank for? She whispered. Avery nodded. And what they made your mother swear to forget. Clara's jaw clenched. One sheet stood out. A page torn from an old diary, written in neat, nervous cursive. She turned it toward the light. March 4th, 1864. I saw it with my own eyes. The deal Prescott made with Colonel Jameson. 50 men, used and discarded. No graves, no names. Hank tried to stop it. They made it look like suicide. They said if I spoke, Clara would be next. So I stayed silent. God forgive me, it was signed. Miriam Whitmore, her mother. Clara sank to her knees. All her life, she'd believed her mother was just scared. But Miriam had been protecting her, bearing the weight of silence to keep her daughter breathing. She felt Everett's hand on her shoulder. Clara, this changes everything. No, she said softly, standing. This reveals everything. Avery rose beside her. The Chronicle is gone, but I still know one press that works. Old Jonas runs it near Elkhorn Ridge. We get this. There, we print the whole truth. Wide as the wind. Everett frowned. Prescott won't wait for a printing press. He'll burn every station between here and Elkhorn. We go quiet, Clara said, and fast. But then, one of the cavalrymen stepped forward, a clean-shaven young man with striking gray eyes. He removed his hat. Miss Whitmore, I believe I know you. Clara raised an eyebrow. Do you? I'm Daniel Prescott, Senator Prescott's nephew. The air turned to ice. Everett moved instinctively, but Daniel raised both hands. Easy, I'm not here for him. He nodded toward Avery. I came because of her. Clara stared him down. And what would a Prescott want with me? Daniel reached into his coat slowly and pulled out a folded letter. I found this in my father's chest, hidden. It's from your mother. To my uncle. He handed it over. Clara unfolded it. The handwriting was her mother's again, only this time not a warning, but a plea. Prescott, you owe them peace. You owe her silence. Don't make her pay for what we buried together. Her hands shook. She looked up at Daniel. What? Are you really doing here? His face hardened. To finish what my uncle started, or maybe to stop it. I haven't decided. Daniel's presence was like a spark dropped on dry timber. Everett didn't lower his gun. You expect us to believe you're here to help? Daniel didn't flinch. I'm not asking for trust. I'm offering a choice. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate. Prescott's empire isn't built on gold or votes. It's built on secrets, on families like yours, Miss Whitmore, and mine. Clara narrowed her eyes. You carry his name. I carry his shame, Daniel snapped, surprising even himself. You think I don't know what he did to my father, my mother? He strangled his own brother's voice just like he did to yours. Clara stared, her fingers tightening around her mother's letters. Why now? Daniel looked at her, eyes suddenly vulnerable. Because I found your name in a letter my father never mailed. He wanted to help your family, Clara. He just didn't get the chance. Avery didn't look convinced. So what? You want to expose him? You want to testify? Daniel gave a slow nod. I want to testify in front of a federal judge. I want your documents. And I want the world to know what my uncle did. Clara hesitated. And in return? Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. I want you to promise me you won't kill him. Silence. Dead. Thick silence. Everett scoffed. You're dreaming, boy. But Clara held up her hand. Why? Daniel looked away. Because if you do, you'll be no better than him. And I'll lose the last reason I have to believe our bloodline can be anything but cursed. Avery stepped forward. And if we say no? Daniel's jaw tensed. Then I walk out of this chapel and you'll never find me again. No testimony. No federal support. You'll be back to running. Clara studied him. This wasn't a bounty hunter or a spy. This was a man caught between legacy and justice. She thought of her mother, of Miriam writing letters in secret, hiding evidence behind an old chapel organ, all to protect a daughter who'd never understand why silence hurt more than bullets. Where's it? The judge? She asked. Daniel's lips curled into something that almost resembled hope. San Ignacio. 10 days ride. He's clean. And he hates Prescott more than I do. Everett shook his head. 10 days with bounty men on our heels. And Prescott's men doubling their search every hour? Clara looked up, eyes hard. Then we ride at night. We ride fast. And we don't stop for anything. Avery gave a grim smile. Just like old times. Clara turned to Daniel. You betray us, and I swear by my mother's grave, I'll end the Prescott name with fire. Daniel nodded. Fair. Deal. Outside, the last light of day faded, and deep in the chapel, under broken floorboards, Clara found something else. A tiny rusted tin box with initials carved on top, HW inside, a wedding ring. A photograph. A journal. Hank Whitmore's last words. Clara clutched it to her chest, heart heavy. They weren't just riding for justice anymore. They were riding for ghosts. The moon was high, a pale coin tossed across the ink-black sky when they rode out from Red Hill Chapel. Clara led the way, her eyes sharp, her hand never far from the revolver at her hip. Everett followed close behind, his rifle strapped across his back. Daniel rode with them, quiet, burdened by the weight of his name. And Avery, wounded but unyielding, guarded the rear like an old lion protecting its pride. The road to San Ignacio was narrow and cruel. Dust rose like ghosts beneath their horses' hooves, and every bend in the trail felt like a trigger waiting to be pulled. They rode in silence for hours, until a sharp whistle pierced the night air. Clara yanked the reins. Down! Bullets! Ripped through the darkness. Sparks flew off stones as lead met earth. Everett returned fire instinctively, shouting, "Ambush!" From the rocks above, figures moved like shadows. 3 men, masked and armed, led by a man with a black duster coat and silver belt buckles shaped like coffin nails. His name was Silas Red, and his legend was the kind children were warned about in whispers. Silas tipped his hat as he stepped into the moonlight. "Well now, if it ain't Miss Whitmore and the traitor son of a devil," Daniel's knuckles went white. "I thought you were dead," Avery growled. Silas chuckled. "Many did. Even the worms stopped waiting on me. But vengeance has a funny way of keeping a man breathing." He pulled a long, curved knife from his belt, not for fighting, for sending messages. "I got paid to deliver. 2 things to Prescott," he said. "The girl and her head." Clara stepped forward. "You'll get neither." Silas grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." With a snap of his fingers, more riders emerged from the darkness. They weren't bounty hunters. They were worse. Prescott's personal enforcers, men with no names and no pasts, Avery cursed. "We ride, now." They turned their horses and bolted into the brush. Trees whipped past, gunshots cracked the night, and Clara felt the wind tear at her face like claws. Daniel's horse stumbled and he barely held on. Clara reached back, grabbed his collar, yanked him upright. "You fall now, and they won't leave enough of you for a coffin." They pushed on until the trees opened into a canyon, the Devil's Split. A narrow pass with one bridge across and nothing but jagged death below. Everett shouted, "We burn it behind us!" Clara nodded. As they galloped across, Avery tossed a bundle of dynamite onto the wooden bridge. With a roar of fire and splinters, the canyon exploded in light. Silas stopped on the far edge, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. He smiled. "This ain't over, little girl," he whispered. "Not by a damn sight." They reached Dustfall by dawn, a forgotten town scorched by the sun and swallowed by sand. It had no law, no prayers, and only one working well. The saloon had bullet holes older than the barkeep, and the general store sold more ammo than apples. Clara tied her horse outside the old printing shack Jonas had once owned. It leaned like a drunk, the door barely hanging on, but inside, the press still stood, rusted, battered, but ready. Avery dusted off the keys. "We got paper. We got ink. Let's bleed the truth." Daniel unrolled the documents. Miriam's letter, the ledgers, Hank's journal. Clara placed the photograph and the ring on top, like anchors holding down memory. Everett stood watch outside, his eyes scanning every rooftop, every alley. He didn't trust this silence. Inside, the press clanked to life. 1 page, then 10, then 20. Truth, inked in blood and sacrifice. But then, a knock. Clara froze. The door creaked open. A boy stood there. 12, maybe 13. dust on his cheeks, fear in his eyes. You're Clara Whitmore? She stepped forward cautiously. Who's asking? The boy handed her a folded telegram. Ryder brought this from Elkhorn. Said it's urgent. Clara tore it open. Her breath caught. Miriam Whitmore found alive. Claims daughter wanted her dead. Prescott to present evidence tomorrow. Federal judge en route to Redwood. She read it twice, then a third time. Daniel took the telegram from her trembling hands. This is a lie. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. She died in my arms. Everett stepped inside. If they've found someone claiming to be her, Avery growled. Then they're planting a double. Someone to say you tried to cover up the past by killing your own mother. Clara's knees buckled. Everything they'd built, the truth, the hope, the sacrifice, now hung on a thread woven from lies. They'll use her to bury the story, she whispered. To bury me. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we beat them to it. We publish first. We ride to Redwood. We force the judge to hear our evidence first. Avery nodded. We've got till sundown. Then we ride. Clara stood, fire back in her eyes. If they're using her face, we'll bring her memory. She took Hank's journal and Miriam's letter and pressed them flat on the final page. The truth has a voice now. Let's make the whole damn West hear it. As the sun rose higher, the presses roared louder, and far beyond the desert, in Prescott's marble office, the senator watched the smoke rise from Dustfall's chimney. He turned to Silas Red. Let them print, he said coldly. Their words will hang beside them. Silas tipped his hat, with pleasure. The Redwood courthouse had never seen so many people. Farmers, ranchers, old soldiers, reporters, all crowded under the wooden beams, whispering as Clara Whitmore stepped inside. Her boots echoed like war drums. Her eyes were dry, her back straight, and in her hands she carried the last journal of Hank Whitmore and the final letter from Miriam. Prescott sat at the front, dressed in black, the American flag behind him. His eyes gleamed with pride and malice. Beside him stood a frail woman in a shawl. She looked like Miriam, moved like Miriam, but Clara knew better. The judge, an aging man with a spine of steel named Judge Collier, banged the gavel. This hearing shall decide whether the evidence presented by Miss Clara Whitmore is true, or whether she is guilty of forgery, conspiracy, and possibly murder. Clara's heartbeat thundered. Prescott's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, this woman, he pointed at the lady in the shawl, is Miriam Whitmore. She was found in a sanatorium in Crosswinds, claiming her daughter left her for dead and faked her death to seize land and leverage false accusations. Gasps swept the courtroom. The woman in the shawl looked up, her face tired, but her voice rehearsed. Clara wanted to destroy the Prescott name. She hated my silence. I tried to stop her. Clara stood. Your Honor, that woman is not my mother. The judge raised an eyebrow. You have proof? Clara held up the journal. This is my father's writing, documenting years of silence, beatings, murders, commissioned by Prescott. And here, she held out the faded letter, is my mother's last message, written days before her death. It names dates, witnesses, documents. Prescott smirked. And what is that worth? Ink on paper? Easily faked. Clara turned to Judge Collier. I don't ask you to believe ink. I ask you to hear her voice. She handed the judge a small wax cylinder, one of the last recordings her mother had made, stored in an old phonograph Avery had recovered from the chapel. The judge nodded. An attendant placed the cylinder into the machine. The room fell still. Then, a crackle, and a voice. Soft, shaken. Miriam Whitmore. If anyone finds this, please know my daughter is innocent. Senator Prescott has ruined families. He thinks killing me will silence the truth. But I have kept records. I've written everything. If Clara survives me, let her finish what I couldn't. The room was silent. Then someone stood, an old rancher. That's her voice, I knew Miriam. That's her. Another woman stood. She delivered my boy. I'd never forget her voice. And then more. One by one, people stood. Not by proof alone, by memory, by truth, by faith. Prescott's lawyer tried to object, but the judge held up a hand. I've heard enough. He turned to Prescott. You are hereby summoned to federal trial. Pending further investigation, your assets are frozen, and you are stripped of legal immunity. Gasps turned to murmurs. Prescott stood, red-faced, jaw tight. This isn't over, girl. Clara stepped forward, eyes steady. No, Senator, it's just beginning. As the gavel fell, Clara finally let go of the breath she'd held for 10 years. Justice hadn't come easy, but it had come. The courthouse doors groaned open as Clara stepped outside. Redwood streets were lined with faces, some familiar, most strangers. But all of them watched her like she'd just done something impossible, something holy. Daniel, Everett, and Avery followed, silent sentinels. For a moment, peace settled over the dust. Then, a single shot cracked the air. A bullet whizzed past Clara's ear and buried itself in the wooden frame of the courthouse. Chaos erupted. Clara hit the ground as Everett pulled her behind a trough. It's him, Silas, from the rooftop across the street. Silas Red stood with his long-barreled rifle and a match in his mouth. You thought truth was a bulletproof vest, girl? He yelled. I promised Prescott your blood. Everett returned fire. Windows shattered. Horses screamed. People scattered. Clara looked to Avery. Cover me. Before he could stop her, she darted across the street, weaving through broken crates and spooked cattle. She reached the building beneath Silas and burst through the door. Dust, stairs, sweat. Her boots pounded up the steps as gunfire echoed from above. On the rooftop, Silas reloaded calmly. He didn't flinch as Clara burst through the door, revolver raised. He turned slowly. You really think you can end me, child? She said nothing. I was born in fire, raised in blood. You're just a girl with stories. Clara's hand trembled. You're right, she said. But I'm also the ending to yours. She fired. Silas staggered back, then again, a second shot to the chest. He fell to his knees, looking almost relieved. They'll replace me, he whispered, blood staining his shirt. Men like me never stay gone. Clara knelt beside him. Then I'll keep writing stories that burn you down again and again. He smiled once, faintly, then fell back into the dust and the silence. It was over. Really over. 3 months later, Redwood had changed. The Whitmore Chapel had been rebuilt, its windows stained with scenes not of saints, but of justice. Daniel now taught reading to ranch kids. Everett ran the town post, and Clara, she bought back her family land. She built a home there, planted peach trees, named her horse Miriam, and every Sunday she read from Hank's journal, on the chapel steps, not just to remember the past, but to protect the future. Final line. Sometimes the truth doesn't gallop in with trumpets. Sometimes it walks in with dust on its boots and blood on its hands, and it still chooses to stand tall.